Hello my loves and welcome to the June vlog. I think it's actually, today's the 14th of June because I'm going to Brighton tomorrow. Well, today actually, for an event, tomorrow for work. Guys, I thought I would do a little check-in with you because I've got a couple of books that I finished or have not finished and need to return. But I feel like I've just read, like, in a row, a series of books which I just have not enjoyed. And I'm just like, But okay, it's okay to have some dead times because I feel like so far this year, my ratings of books have been very much in the, like, 3.5 and above. So this is fine. So the first one we're going to talk about is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I requested this because I saw Mercedes talking about her new novel and I remember this was like all the rage at some point. So I was like, let me read it. I mean, at the time I didn't really want to read it because I just feel like there are certain types of fiction that I just don't get on board with. Like, I just feel like they're written for a certain demographic and I'm not that demographic, and like, even with books that I do love, sometimes I'm like, I'm not that demographic, but I love it. This was not for me. I ended up DNFing this because I just thought this was so annoying. The main character, Irina, is not a nice person. I don't really care if main characters are not likable, all of that stuff. But the whole kind of drugs, being a despicable person and stuff like that, I'm not interested in that. Like, there are so many women walking around like that. I have grown up, like, you know, knowing girls like that. I don't find it interesting. I don't find it interesting to read about. And I guess the most interesting part of this book should be her work. The fact that, you know, she photographs men, she's a photographer, she photographs men and in quite a sexualized way, which is, I guess, quite different from the norm in which women are usually photographed in that way. Even that was not enough to get me. I was like, this is just not enough, because all of it was just annoying. It's annoying that someone has so much like disdain for everyone. It's just annoying to read about. I didn't find any of this compelling, any of this interesting. If I'm not enjoying it, why would I continue? So I just put the book down. I was like, I'm going to DNF this. I will still check out her second book because I think it is on quite a different topic. I don't think for me the writing style was an issue here. But it's just one of those books where it's just kind of like, and I guess she's northern, so I guess there's, you know, that kind of like minority kind of element to it there. Listen, it's not for me. Not interesting. So then after that, I read this book, which is a translation, which I didn't actually realise, and it's called How to Love Your Daughter. This book reminds me of The Second Woman in the way that it, for me, the premise of it sounds so freaking interesting, and it starts off, not The Second Woman, sorry. Is it The Second Woman? I've forgotten the name of it. It's because two of them were translations, but it's the one about the woman who, like, super loves her husband. It's definitely not The Second Woman, because The Second Woman is about, like, domestic violence. You know, I'll put the cover up here of the book I am talking about. In that, you start off reading a, like, interesting premise, cool. And I think these books just become incredibly tedious because it's just repetitive, and it's just like, the story is not going anywhere. This book is about a woman, I don't know what her name is actually, who is basically recounting the fact that she's standing outside her daughter's house, and her daughter has 2 grandkids and she's never met these grandkids. And then it goes on to talk about, like, basically the woman's life and how when her daughter was born, what life was like for her and her husband then, and basically how much she loved her daughter. Listen, I don't know if it's just because, like, I'm not a mother or anything like that, but to me there was no presence in here that showed me how much she loved her daughter. Yes, there was this kind of, like, obsession of, I just want to do everything for her, blah 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 blah, but none of that felt like love. And maybe that's the whole point of the story, like, that it just felt like she was just like, I do this for her, we were so enmeshed, blah 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 blah. But I guess that's what I'm kind of drawing towards. It felt a lot like enmeshment, and it was enmeshment on her part, and it just felt like her daughter never got the chance to be. which, you know, when you, as the story rolls on and like you towards the end kind of find out the dynamic and why now her and her daughter are like, I guess, not speaking while she's not in her daughter's life, you're like, okay, cool, like that makes sense. Like maybe your daughter decided to like remove herself from that. But actually it's sparked by an incident. And sometimes I feel like when you read fiction, well, this is me at least anyway, but I think sometimes things happen in a book and you're like, oh, okay, I didn't think that was that deep. Whereas in real life it would be quite catastrophic, right? The thing I think for me with the incident that happened with the daughter, as the daughter was like not the main instigator of it, I think I'm quite surprised by the kind of repercussions it had. And I think as well, the blame that the daughter might assign to the mother is the kind of blame I guess you do assign when you are a teenager. I think when you grow up, and in this case, you know, the daughter marries and like has these two kids and, you know, has her own children, I think then perhaps there is this sort of like growing up of like, oh, perhaps like my mother wasn't to blame. And I hope that would be some sort of like rekindling between them. Overall, I thought the book was quite dull. It was really, really boring. Like, you wait so long to kind of find out why her and her daughter aren't speaking, and I don't think it's worth that wait. It's, like I said, the book is incredibly freaking tedious, and I'm just like, okay, like, I don't know, like, it was just so boring. I was just like, I was expecting so much more for it, and I can't believe, like, the sum of this book was meant to be fascinating, because I was incredibly bored, and the only reason I kept on reading was to find out why her and her daughter weren't talking. And it didn't have to be something incredibly sensational, but I just feel like even when we found out and then like we get towards the end, none of that is interesting. There's no nice conclusion, and I don't mean nice as in like a reunion that's like lovely or stuff like that, but there's just nothing said. And I think that's the thing that's annoying. Like, nothing is actually explored. All of it is from the mum's perspective. You don't get anything from the daughter, which would have just strengthened the story so much, because we only get the mum's perspective. It's like you go from A to B and travel nowhere. Like, it's just absolutely insane. So yeah, once I finished this, I was like, that was not worth it. I wish I'd like not read this book. And then we have Sorrow and Bliss. This is a book I do wish I DNF'd, because again, this was a book I found quite tedious, and I feel really bad saying that because this is a book based on mental illness. And I think for me it just got tedious because it's written from the perspective of a character, Martha. And it says, you know, at 40, her husband Patrick leaves her. And so we know that quite in the beginning of the story, and it's on the blurb as well. And then she's recounting her life, just like growing up and things like that. She has a sister who seems, okay, I think her sister is younger than her. And then she has her mum, who is an alcoholic, and her dad, who is a failed poet. And then she has her mum's sister and like cousins and things like that. And her husband Patrick is a friend of one of her cousins. And so we're just basically following Martha's life. And one of the things is that it's not specified exactly what Martha has, but you will just guess that it is a very severe form of depression, or just depression itself, right? And it is just about the way in which it affects her life. And what this book does really well is it doesn't make it super like sensationalized or like super interesting in the way that, you know, mental illness can really just like decimate your life, right? And it doesn't have to be like, oh, I did all these like incredibly crazy things because of it. It is just watching Martha self-sabotage at every single point. And I think even in real life, when you see someone like that gets annoying. In a book, it is kind of like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. It just goes on and on. Like, there is no build up, there's nothing, you know, it's a steady state in the book. And I think it does a really good job of, you know, depicting mental illness and its effects day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. I think it does a really good job of that. Sadly, I think because it does such a good job of that, it makes it really boring. And also, I think as well, one of the things I got from this, and this is just, you know, personal take, is I think, and, you know, this is what some of the characters in the book say, Martha is quite lucky in the way that she was able to carry on day after day in that and still have people around her who completely loved her and never left. And I think that security in having like the people around, even though she didn't feel that, you know, I don't know, makes this story kind of like, I guess, privileged to me. And I just don't, in a way that I don't know that so many people have access to that, and that's fine because life is different for everyone. But I think, yeah, for me reading that, I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe I just felt something, and that's the kind of one takeaway I had from it. So yeah, I think overall I just found it okay. Like, you know, it's not a terrible book, it's not a bad book, but I think it's kind of accuracy and repetitiveness makes it kind of just middle for me. But I can, when I was reading reviews about this book, I could see like so many people loving it, and I can, when I read those reviews, I can see why they like it. Like, you know, and if you really like fall into the case of liking it, that's fine. One of the things, although I found, was people saying that she was really funny and really witty and stuff like that. I didn't find any humour in this book. So I found that really bizarre, actually. I was just like, oh, okay, but that's just like different people, humour's different for everyone. But yeah, so it's one of those books where I can see why for some people they would rate it 5 stars. Like if you're actively also like going through depression or have just come out of an episode, or you have, like, I think, you know, there are some books that will absolutely hit the mark for you and you'll be like, wow, that was accurate. And I do think it is, but for me, like, its accuracy doesn't make it interesting. So there we go. So those are the books, 3 books I've read in a row and just been like, ooh. So I'm not sure where my fiction reviews are going to go now. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey in terms of books. But one thing I'm really glad about is that I got all of these from the library, so I can just like return all of them without feeling any sort of guilt in the fact that I didn't really love any of them and they don't have to like stay on my bookshelf. Hi guys, and welcome to the end of the June vlog. I had such a lovely time at the end of June. I didn't film like any of it. I went to Manchester for a work conference, and the conference itself went really well. Had such a really lovely time with my colleague, and it was the one time where I've been to like a different city for work that I decided to stay on, and so glad I did. So glad that I picked Manchester, because I ended up staying on a little bit longer and staying with a friend who lives in Altrincham. Which wasn't like too far from Manchester. So I just had this wonderful day on Monday of just like exploring like Manchester by myself. I mainly followed food places. It all happened so seamlessly. I just started seeing recommendations on social media for food places, and so yeah, I had a really good like just time trying some different places. It was just really nice. But yeah, I didn't include any sort of video footage, but I'm sticking some pictures up here, mainly of the foods, but also I love like the architecture. And yeah, I think reading a bit more about like Manchester's history and things like that, I'm like, okay, I see how this all came together, but still absolutely beautiful. And it clearly looks like a city where they've had like a lot of regeneration put into it. So that's fun. And also I'm told that the salsa and bachata scene there is really good. I actually saw one of my dance teachers from Glasgow in Manchester on the Friday. It was so weird. Me and my colleague were just walking down the street and I was like, oh, I know that guy. And I don't know anyone in Manchester. So that was funny. But anyway, I thought I would wrap up the month of June and just talk about the books that I read. I mean, I already spoke about 2 of them in that last clip that you would have seen pre the kind of like people playing the string instruments, and that event was so nice. It was like a local event in my area that they hold every year. It's just along like the lanes of these houses, not too far from here, and it was just so nice. It's just a wonderful community event. I was helping out on the tombola stand, but I did have a good chance to like walk around and see some of the other stalls, and it was just like really nice. And those were just people playing in like their back garden. It was so cool. Went in there for, I believe, some cakes or something, and then I was with a friend and we were just listening to the music, and then we were just like, I think at the same time realised that it was live and not a CD playing. It was absolutely gorgeous. But anyway, for the month of June, I ended up finishing 8 books. So I spoke about 2 of them in that video and the other book, Boy Parts, that I DNF'd. But at the beginning of June, I finished reading Anastasy's Gold, which was the winner of the Jalak Prize. Really liked that. I gave that 4 stars. I found it really fascinating. And then I also finally completed the complete poetry collection by Maya Angelou. I have been reading it for a very long time. So I started it in March this year and then finished it at the beginning of June. There was just a lot in there. I gave that 3 stars in the end. Another book that I finished in June is a book that I was so excited to read. It's a NetGalley arc. I love the author's debut. And that book is Allow Me to Introduce Myself. The debut is called Someday Maybe, and I believe I read that in, 2022. Sadly, I ended up giving this book 1.5 stars. It's a book that's tackling being like a child social media star, and I think it has a really added element. This is something I didn't realise until I started reading the book. Maybe it's obvious to other people, it just wasn't obvious to me. is the blurb talks about the fact that our main character Nuri is, you know, child social media star, ex-child social media star, and her mother, she can see that her mother's doing the same to her sister and she wants to put a stop to it. What's interesting about this book is Nuri is black and her mum is white because it is her stepmom. And so her sister is mixed race. But I thought that added an extra kind of interesting element to it, because we're talking about, you know, child vlogging and all of those things. And then we're adding the factor in of like race. There's actually a really interesting woman that I watch on YouTube, and she's probably like the only kind of like mummy blogger I watch. I've never been one like that's been into any of that stuff. I'm not that interested in other people's children. I don't care. But the reason I came across her, I guess, or I started watching her or find her interesting, is because actually her family is built through adoption. At the time when I was watching her, now she has one biological child who I believe will be like their last kid. But they actually have, I think, 3 African American children, and then I think like 1 child who might be white, and then the other is, I believe, mixed with something else. And I just found it interesting that, you know, that she had decided to, like, her and her husband had decided to like adopt transracially. So that's the only people that I follow. Otherwise I don't understand the fascination behind it. So for me in this book there were so many elements in it, and I think the problem is just those 2 themes that I've kind of spoken about. You would think, okay, that would be the main focus. There are so many other things that are also like tied into this book, and I feel like it wanted to do a lot, and therefore it doesn't do any of the things that it wants to do well at all. Everything, I feel like it was just very surface level, and I don't think I very much liked Nuri as a character, main character, and so I think it's actually hard to feel like a lot of kind of like, I guess, the sympathy you're supposed to feel from this book for her when you're just a bit like, I actually think you're a bit annoying. And I think the main issue I found with this book is the author really wants to let you know about the strong bonds that she has in terms of friendship. To me they just feel like very like forced for the book, and a lot of it was the case of telling rather than showing, just, you know, showing us through like memories and things like that. It was all very heavy-handed, and I could just feel it. You were being spoon-fed what you were meant to feel, and it's just such a contrast to a previous book which deals with grief. It is talking about the grief and loss of the main character's partner who dies, who kills himself. So a lot of that we're dealing with grief, and we're dealing with her dealing with his family, because again we're dealing with a main black character and her partner was white, and his mother and her kind of attitudes towards her. So yeah, that was a shame, but all good. So I also read 2 Agatha Christie's, and I listened to those as audiobooks, and these were the Superintendent Battle books, so they was number 2 and number 5, and it's a very loose connection. They put them in this sort of Superintendent Battle collection, but none of the books are kind of like, you know, one of them is a Poirot book, and the rest are kind of have like different sleeves, so they're not connected in any other way other than the detective, and he doesn't even play a huge part in it. All of these usually comes in at the end. So then yeah, I spoke about How to Love Your Daughter and Sorrow and Bliss, but the final collection I finished, actually I have it so I'll grab it. So the final collection I finished is this book called Out There. I don't know what the camera's doing, but this is a short story collection, and it says here on the back, "Out There is for readers who consider body horror to be a love language. True romantics will swoon either despite or because of the gore." I just love that. People who consider body horror to be a love language. Those peoples are not me. I'm not really a fan of like horror, gory stuff. I'm not a fan. But I feel like if this is what it is, I can be a fan, because this to me feels like a very light touch, and I think this is because this is combined with some really nice kind of like psychological stories and elements in here that I found to be very enjoyable, very thought-provoking. You know, one of the first stories it says here is, "A woman uses dating apps to find a partner despite the threat posed by bots. Artificial men more interested in stealing data than dating." And then it says here, "A sculptor trapped in a skyscraper restaurant when a violent coup erupts below creates a perfect model of the town as it's destroyed." Yeah, there are so many like different stories in here, and a lot of them deal with like, you know, kind of dating in the digital age that we sort of live in now, and I think it's only 1 or 2 that really deal with dating. And what I liked about this collection is the first and last story are set in kind of the same world, so they kind of link, but in a they have very different endings, and in no way does it feel repetitive. It actually feels kind of nice to come back to the Big Sur and find out a little bit more about the Blots and like the other side of it. And I think what I liked about this book is it has a real sense of romance and love in it. And what I mean by that is, in like, you have the first one where people are using dating apps to like find love, and you have these men that are more interested in dating, but then there's also a story about people and their attraction. So, you know, instead of being attracted to certain characteristics or physical attributes of a person, you are attracted to certain body parts of people. So you'd be like a liver person, an eye person, and in this book I think the person is a brain person, or, you know, you might be interested in like the person's spinal cord. And I found that so interesting because I think the essence of that story basically is kind of like, what are you willing to give up for love, especially in the case of someone who is a brain person, because essentially if the person wants to take bits and bits of your brain, what are you going to be left with if you if you do decide this is a person that I want to choose? So I found that concept to be very interesting, but I just found like what was its essence underneath it so fascinating, because yeah, it's horror, it's gory at the end, but it's like okay, that's love in a form, isn't it? And there's also another book which is about a house that needs moisture. And I finished that, I came away from that story, again, finding it so fascinating. And I remember saying to my friend who lent me this that I liked the guy's dedication, because again, we're talking about the essence of love and dedication. What are you willing to do when something requires care day after day? And essentially you become absorbed by it, consumed by it, and it becomes a part of you, a reflection of you. Very, very fascinating. And then the final story, which links back to the first one again, is, I guess, in a way, again, to do with love, but helping someone fulfill their purpose at a cost to you. So I found these to be incredibly fascinating, just so interesting in the sense of the way it dealt with like technology, and the digital age, but also the way it factors love into some of the stories. So I really, really enjoyed this collection. I gave it 3.5 stars, but talking about it now, I feel like I want to give it 4. I haven't read a short story collection in years, I want to say, but I think I might look for something more similar to this. Because I really, really enjoyed this, and this was just like someone who was talking to me about like the stories in here, and I was like, do you know what, I'll give it a go, because I have space to read another book, and I'm so glad I did, because this ended up being like something I never would have heard. I've never heard of it before, and would never have picked up, but I have, and I really, really liked it. So that's the month of June. So like I said, June, I'm going to put the stats up here from Storygraph, but 8 books. You can see the number of pages, the number of hours, and you've got like the moods and stuff there. The kind of 2 that stick out the most are reflective, which is the green one, and then emotional, which is the orange one. I'll ignore some of the other stats here, but if we're looking at page numbers, we've got 4 books that I read that were between 300 and 500 pages, and the rest were all under 300 pages. If we look at the split of fiction and non-fiction, 2 non-fiction books and the rest are all fiction titles. Then if you look at the genres, literary is the one that tops the charts, but then you've got all the rest of the other genres that they also happen to fall into. And then if we look at formats, this is probably one of the only kind of months that I can think of, and maybe next month, well, July as well, that this will look any different to other months, because it contains digital, but usually it would contain audio and print. But you can see I read 1 digital book, which I said was the NetGalley Arc, and then the 2 Agatha Christie books, and the rest are all print titles. But then if we look at the final rating for June, you can see my average rating is 2.75, which I think is reflective of the way I've spoken about some of the books that I've read. So unfortunately a lot of my rating is weighted towards the lower half of 5, well, lower half of 5, one of the kind of between 1 and 5. But I'm hoping next month or July that it'll be a lot better. But yeah, so thank you for watching this video, and I'll catch you in another one. Bye!